everybody. Welcome to another episode of Mind Matters, Navigating Hit Injuries and Concussions. My name is Kylie Como. I'm the legal nurse consultant with Shane Smith Law. Today we're joined again by Dr. Bashuk. Dr. Bashuk, it's wonderful to see you again.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
So I think something else you got me thinking about, you were talking about the myths earlier. I think another myth might be the force required to sustain a concussion. Most people, I think it's, a big punch to the face by a boxer, a big football hit by a linebacker, or a massive high-speed car crash. Is that true?
One thing about a concussion, everything that I described is not visible. So it's a functional abnormality. It's not a structural abnormality. So all these chemical changes that occur, and you can't see that on any type of scan. And that causes actually a problem. And the depression, this ATP drop that occurs for 3 to 6 weeks, a person's symptoms may actually improve in 7 to 10 days, but their energy deficit has still not corrected itself. And so that's why a person may potentially try to go back too soon. And if you think about it, if you have a fracture of your arm and you put a cast on it, there's a lot of pain those first few days, but the pain improves. But you can't go back and play the sport with a broken arm. You have to wait until it heals completely. And that's kind of what we're saying here is with concussion, you need to wait until it heals, because if it doesn't heal, then that can lead to something called second impact syndrome, where if you go and you have another concussion and there's another 20% drop in ATP, that can result in permanent and severe brain damage. So, with a fracture, you can see it. They put a cast on. Everybody knows what's going on. But with a concussion, it's invisible. And that can be very frustrating for patients because I don't feel right. Something's wrong. But nothing's showing up on my CAT scan or MRI. So we have to say, well, your CAT scan and MRI aren't going to show anything. We need to think about it in terms of G-forces. And so that's the gravitational force. And as you and I are sitting on Earth, standing or sitting, there's a G-force of 1 on our body and the Earth. To have a concussion, the G-force needs to be between 70 and 120, okay, with 90, 95, 96 being average. And so to put that in context, a motor vehicle accident at 30 miles per hour where the airbags deploy, that's 60 Gs. If an Olympic boxer were to hit you with a jab, that's going to be about 56 Gs. And so it takes a significant force actually to have a concussion. Whiplash, on the other hand, requires a G-force of about 4.5 Gs. So everybody with a concussion has whiplash. Not everybody with whiplash has a concussion. And if you think about, I'm going to go over just 2 sports, football and soccer. When you hit a soccer ball, the G-force there is about 20 Gs. So hitting a soccer ball is not anything close to enough to give you a concussion. However, if you get hit in the head with a soccer ball and you don't see it coming, well, that's a whole different ballgame, okay? But as in general, hitting a soccer ball is not going to cause a concussion. And in football, 77% of hits in football, professional football, are below 30 Gs. Only about 0.02% of hits in football are above 70 Gs. So that's why you don't see a concussion on every play. You do see a lot of concussions in football because every single play, there's 11 guys more likely than not that are hitting each other, or I guess 22 guys. Okay. So there's a lot of hits in football. Fortunately, most of them are not enough to cause a concussion.
Good to know. I think we might have had some of our listeners a little scared there for a second, but that's good to differentiate. There is one thing, in talking a lot, especially when we're talking about sports or whatnot, you start to think about men's sports versus and women's sports. Is there a difference in how a male and a female, take on a concussion or process that?
So there are a lot more men who play sports. So there's a lot more men who get concussion than women. But if you take sports that are, for example, basketball, soccer, hockey, there are some women that play football, but generally that's probably 99% men. But if you take equal sports, women actually have more concussions than men. Now, there's several possible reasons. We don't really know for sure what the reasons are, but one reason is men's necks tend to be bigger than women. And what that allows is, because a man's neck is generally bigger, there's going to be less movement when the traumatic event occurs. Women tend to have more flexibility in their neck than men, but with that flexibility comes more acceleration, deceleration, and the greater likelihood of a concussion. It could be related to estrogen and progesterone, female hormones. There's some studies that certainly suggest that. And then there's one other reason why. Okay? And I think, quite frankly, I think this reason is probably significant, although I can't prove it. And that is simple, that women tend to tell the truth more. Okay. So yeah, I think it has to do with neck size. It may be hormonal, but I think women are more likely to actually tell the truth. There was a podcast on, I forget exactly what it was, but it had two professional football players talking about how they covered each other's back. And so what would happen is one of them got hit pretty hard. The other one would run over to him and tell him what the day was, what the year was, who we were playing, and what the score was. And so they kind of had each other's back. All right. Well, they're good buddies, but I don't think that's really a good idea. Telling the truth is pretty important.
Yeah, agree. That's a funny anecdote. I think, I would agree with you there. I'm sure there's some correlative evidence out there somewhere that playing the tough guy is not necessarily a good thing, and especially in the case of potential concussion. So being honest is 100% on the nose for sure. Could you tell me a little bit more, Dr. Bashuk, about let's look at concussions on the kind of the spectrum, right? So we've got the acute concussion, like the first couple of days, week maybe. Then you mentioned it could drag on for days, weeks, even months, possibly get into that persistent post-concussion symptom. Talk about that. What's the difference?
Again, acute concussion is basically the electrical chaos followed by the depression. You've got the energy deficit that goes on for 3 to 6 weeks. During that time, a person the typical symptoms are going to be headaches, dizziness, memory issues, brain fog, trouble concentrating, focusing, difficulty sleeping, blurred vision, fatigue during the day. Those are common symptoms. And again, the energy deficit lasts for 3 to 6 weeks. But what happens is those symptoms can continue because they may be the result of, for example, autonomic nervous system dysfunction, which we mentioned. And if that's not treated, then that can persist. If a person had ocular, motor, or vestibular abnormalities in the acute phase, and that's not treated, then those symptoms can persist. If a person, let's say they are at risk for neuroinflammation, and the reason a person may be at risk for neuroinflammation is they have low vitamin D levels, they have low omega-3 levels, they eat a very high inflammatory diet. So there are dietary factors. Also, your neck is a big issue. So a person can develop significant problems with the neck. Again, whiplash occurs with pretty much everybody with a concussion. And so if your neck is not treated, the symptoms of concussion and whiplash are very, very similar. And so the symptoms of concussion are over with, but the person has whiplash and the symptoms basically haven't changed any. It's still going on. That neck needs to be treated. But another big issue is education. People need to understand that the concussion after 6 weeks is over with. If you still have symptoms after that, we need to look at autonomic nervous system dysfunction. We need to look at ocular vestibular abnormalities. We need to look at dietary and hormonal factors. We need to look at the neck. We need to provide some additional education. So all of those factors are really important in taking care of somebody whose symptoms have persisted for over a month. So it used to be acute concussion, they would say up to 3 months, but now after the 2022 conference, they say that acute concussion is the first month, and then if it's after 1 month, they feel like that is persistent post-concussion symptoms. It used to be called post-concussion syndrome, and quite frankly, in our electronic medical record, it still is post-concussion syndrome. So that's what we put when we see somebody, but it really should be persistent post-concussion symptoms.
So the symptoms, we're talking a lot about symptoms, and you've mentioned quite a few of some of the symptoms I think most people think about when they hear about concussion. The irritability, maybe the memory issues, the brain fog, if you will, the headaches, fatigue. Are those specific to concussion, would you say, or how would you drill down on that?
All of the symptoms of concussion are very nonspecific. You can see the same symptoms in concussion as in whiplash. You can see most of the symptoms in concussion people who've got a bad migraine headache. You can see the symptoms if somebody had a very poor night's sleep. So again, if somebody has PTSD, if somebody has a lot of anxiety and depression. So the symptoms of concussion are very nonspecific. And so you need to think about these other disorders. Are these symptoms from the concussion or something else that could be going on as well? That person could be significantly depressed. If you're not sleeping well as a result of the concussion and the pain, that's just going to exacerbate things. So that's why treatment of concussion needs to be multifaceted. You need to look at all of the aspects of it. And I mentioned this earlier. I like to use, there's a concussion phenotype. And what we mean by phenotype is this person comes in, he gives the story, there was a traumatic event, he's got a biomechanical plausible mechanism of injury, he's got these symptoms, but you also need to be concerned that other etiologies could be contributing to it, and so everything needs to be evaluated in the phenotype. So the person comes in and their complaint is headache and anxiety. Okay, well, that's their phenotype. The next guy comes in and it's memory loss and insomnia. The next person comes in, their phenotype is headaches, dizziness, nausea, irritability, and insomnia. So everybody has a different phenotype, and each of those complaints basically need to be addressed.
Yeah, it sounds like it gets very complicated, almost like a concussion has its own fingerprint. It's got so many different factors of variability that can be involved with, right?
So to say it like that, I think using the fingerprint analogy is really helpful. And so the person who's having headaches and dizziness, we may not need to do a lot of cognitive tests on that person because they're not having any memory issues. But 90% of people with concussion do have headaches. The vast majority of them are migraine-like. These medications for the headaches, they're called CGRP medicines or anti-CGRP medicines, and they're used for migraine. And these medications, people may have heard of these. It's Nurtec, Ubrelvy, Ajovy, Emgality, Amavig, Vyepti. I really like Vyepti. There's a lot of reasons why I like Vyepti. But these drugs are anti-CGRP drugs because CGRP is what's known as calcitonin gene-related protein. And this is in your brain. And people with migraines have elevated CGRP levels. People with concussion have elevated CGRP levels. And these drugs reduce the CGRP levels. And we've had enormous success in treating post-traumatic migraine type headaches, which is the vast majority of headaches after concussion, with these drugs. Again, they don't work in every single person, but the vast majority of people we see excellent results with.
I've worked alongside several nurses in my previous roles, and I know infusion centers are becoming more and more popular destination for sending patients for various ailments, and migraines is one of those things that I think those centers see so much more of these days because of those medications, some of those anyway, that maybe you need to go to an infusion center, have a once a month or once a week kind of infusion, but I've heard some great things about some of those medicines you just mentioned.
The one that I really like is called Vyepti, and that's Vyepti. Vyepti is a anti-CGRP medicine, and it's given IV. And we do it in our office actually, and it helps. Not only it's actually approved for chronic headaches, okay, but there are studies that show it's beneficial for acute headaches. So I will often start somebody on one of the oral anti-CGRP drugs for a week or so and see if we get a response, and then try to do the Vyepti, because the Vyepti will last for 3 months. And what we've seen is not only does it help the headaches, it helps resolve the headaches. So we may only have to do it one time. So the injectables, they're also good, and we also do those in the office. They last for about a month. But the IV Vyepti, what I really would like actually is I'd like to see people get it in the emergency room, okay? Because I think it'll help the acute headache that they have. It may actually even prevent the headache from happening if they haven't had a headache. But once they get it, it likely will last for 3 months, and it will really improve that person's quality of life. Because when you have a bad headache, you can't sleep. And when you can't sleep, that causes an increase in neuroinflammation. So we do quite a bit of the Vyepti, and we've had very good results with it. Now, again, it's not FDA approved for, all these CGRP drugs, and any drug for concussion is not, there's no FDA approval for it. We use it all off label, but the similarity of migraine and concussion headaches is remarkable, and they respond very similar.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you expanded on that. I think it's important. Concussion and the way we treat and view concussions have come so far, and just in the last decade, I have no doubt that those medicines will be used for concussion specifically in the near future. Again, I've heard quite good things about that. You talked about how these, the anti-CGRP specifically target, the neuroinflammation, the whole kind of interconnection with sleep, neuroinflammation, and then the lymphatic system. Talk about kind of the interplay between those inside of a concussion.
So after concussion, you get neuroinflammation, and that basically is inflammation in the brain. And when that occurs, that it typically is going to cause that person to have headaches, dizziness, and difficulty sleeping. And if you're not sleeping, then something called your glymphatic system, not your lymphatic system, but the glymphatic system does not work properly. So what the glymphatic system is, think about it, it is a waste retrieval system in the brain. So basically, during the day, your brain is active and toxins build up, and you need to get rid of those toxins. And what happens is when you sleep, the glymphatic system turns on. 80% of the function of the glymphatic system occurs while you're sleeping. Just think about it. If you stayed up all night, you're going to be really tired the next day. You're not going to feel well. You're going to have trouble focusing. Guess what? All the symptoms of a concussion. You might have a headache. You might be irritable. You might have brain fog. Well, that's because the glymphatic system was not working because you stayed up all night, and all these toxins built up, and they're still there, and you need to get rid of them, and you're not going to get rid of them until the next night. And so this glymphatic system, think about it like your kidneys, okay? So if I didn't let you urinate for 18 hours, you might be a little uncomfortable. You might not be able to focus. You can't wait to get to the bathroom, okay? All right, so think about the glymphatic system as getting rid of the waste products in the brain. Now, the problem with a concussion and neuroinflammation is a concussion causes a drop in the function of the glymphatic system by about 60%. So concussion disrupts the ability of the glymphatic system to get rid of the toxins. Now you can't sleep, so the glymphatic system doesn't turn on. These waste products build up, and this causes more neuroinflammation, and it's a vicious cycle. And that's why sleep is so critical in people who've had a concussion. And so that's one of the big things that we do is, again, we use a lot of supplements to try to help with sleep. Omega-3 is really good to help reduce neuroinflammation. It helps with sleep. Vitamin D, same thing. Melatonin is helpful. So, and we use some other ones, but supplements can be very helpful in turning off that neuroinflammation. And then once that person is sleeping better, and again, another reason that a person can't sleep is because the autonomic nervous system is turned on, it becomes more sympathetic than parasympathetic, and then doing the Buffalo concussion treadmill test helps turn that off, helps reduce neuroinflammation, and that's why it helps with sleep, because it helps restore the function of the glymphatic system.
Wow. That's a great breakdown. I think one important thing I've caught there, we talked earlier about rest and get better is not the way to do it, but there's a difference between resting and sleeping, right? I think
so.
Some of our
that's a great point. Okay, rest is not rest. Rest is not the deal. It's about it's sleep, and you got to get into the to the deep sleep, slow wave sleep. All right, because when you get into slow wave sleep, That helps. That's when the lymphatic system is turned on. That's when it's functioning properly. And so if you don't get there, that can be a problem. So it's not rest, it is sleep. And one of the things that everybody knows that helps with sleep is exercise and eating right and taking care of yourself.
Yeah, it all plays hand in hand for sure. Can't have one without the other anyway. So that's excellent.
It's the number one thing is rest is the wrong thing to do. Everybody needs to know that. Well, let me just add this. Exercise is how you get better. It helps the symptoms, but it's important that you understand about the exercise. It has to be done in the right way. If you're going to go and get on a treadmill and run as fast as you can and get your heart rate for as high as you possibly can, for as long as you can, that actually is going to make you worse. And that's why when we do the Buffalo Concussion treadmill test or the Buffalo Concussion bike test, we always do it in the office first and do the parameters of your heart rate. Okay, I had a concussion. I'm going to get on a treadmill and I'm going to run for 5 miles. That is going to make things worse. It has to be done properly. And with the Buffalo Concussion treadmill test, you want your heart rate in zone for 20 minutes. And for the Buffalo Concussion bike test, you want your heart in zone for 30 minutes. There is also available what's known as the Buffalo Concussion marching test. So let's say somebody doesn't have a treadmill or a bike. I mean, you can walk, okay? People can walk, but where do we live? We live in Atlanta metropolitan area. And what are the issues with that? First of all, weather. Okay, you're going to go and you're going to do your 30-minute walk, but guess what? It's pouring down rain, so you're not going to go do it. You're not going to do it in the summer because it's too hot, and sometimes in the winter it can be too cold. All right, so weather is always an issue. Also, in Atlanta we have hills, so that's why we prefer the treadmill, while we prefer the bike, because we can control that. You know, going up and down hills, your heart rate goes up and comes down. No, we want it consistent. The other issues I have with walking are 3. One is, I don't know about you, but in my neighborhood, we have neighbors, and you start walking and they want to start talking to you. Well, you can't, that's not what you need to do with the Buffalo Concussion treadmill test. It needs to be consistent, but you don't want to be rude and not talk to somebody. The other thing are critters. You know, when there are dogs running after you, and somebody who's driving on the road who wants to run you off the sidewalk. So I worry about critters, neighbors, and vehicles as well. So that's why we prefer, and people tend to do better with the treadmill or with the bike. But again, you can walk, and we do have people that walk, and they do quite well, but it's just not quite the same. And again, the other thing I'm gonna say is, you know, it's better with a stationary bike than it is a regular bike, because again, you can fall off the bike. I do spin class quite a bit. I've yet to see somebody fall off the bike. I do see a lot of people mountain biking that come in because they've had concussion. So doing it safely with a treadmill and with a stationary bike. And the other thing, I always tell people, you know, I want you to go to the internet and Google Buffalo Concussion treadmill test and watch some of the videos. If somebody want to look at the research papers, there's hundreds of them. You can spend the next 2 months looking at these papers. But I encourage people to do that all the time, so they hear that from somebody besides me.
All right, everyone, that's going to do it for another episode of Mind Matters, Navigating Head Injuries and Concussions. Thank you, Dr. Bashuk, once again for sharing your knowledge and your passion for taking care of folks with concussions with us today. To our audience, as always, please remember to like and subscribe to our channel to stay up to date with our latest content, and please hit that bell for notifications. And remember, if you're in pain, call Shane at 980-999-9999.
In pain, so I call Shane. 980-999-9999. In pain, call Shane.